Good morning. I just wanted to give a brief wrap up of our discussion from last week with regards to the Darwin Chemical Company case. I was enjoying many of the comments you all made. Um, I wanted to point out, I guess, maybe four different things. First of all, how you approach this case may depend upon your view of a company's social responsibility. I want to take you back to chapter two. Um, on page 37 of chapter 2, we saw figure 2.3, where it talks about the different levels of social responsibility that a company can have. And like the very fundamental level is they have a legal responsibility. In other words, you can conduct business as long as it's just within the law. And all you have to do, I'm sorry, the most basic one is profit. That's what it is. That your ultimate goal really is just to return value to the shareholders, and so therefore you do that by making a profit. And so a company is morally responsible just to make a profit. Milton Friedman made that argument in a classic article back in the 70s, where he said, given the fact that most corporations you have are run not by the owners, but are run by managers that are in essence hired by the owners as shareholders, and so therefore these managers have a fiduciary duty and a moral duty to just simply make a profit. But then someone might say, well, but you have to consider the law, and so the next step up is well, as long as you're within the bounds of the law and making a profit, then that's the extent of your social responsibility. So, for example, like in this case, although the case doesn't necessarily say what the Chinese law was with regards to dumping toxic waste into a river, but we have to assume that that would be against the law. And so one might say, well, if it is in fact against the law, then Jared um, needs to take responsibility for that, and they shouldn't have been dumping toxic waste in the river, and so therefore he's responsible for following that law. However, if there wasn't a Chinese law about dumping toxic waste, then someone could say that he's reached the extent of his moral responsibilities and he doesn't have to do anything beyond that. Since there's no law against it, he can continue to do so and go from there. Of course, then you go up a bit and you say, well, no, one has to consider how you do business, and so therefore you have this moral responsibility to do it in an ethical manner. You have to consider what is right and what is good, and then the final level is having you have a philanthropic duty, a duty to society and to improve society and use your resources to benefit society and to help others. Kind of an altruistic view of business, and so how you approach this case may depend upon on where you land on that scale that we find in chapter 2 on page 37, figure 2.3. Um, Also, it was interesting. Many of your comments, of course, focused on the implications for the company if they are found out or if they admit to this, and what are the repercussions or some of the negatives for it. Some of you focused on the benefits. I appreciated Tara's comment when she said, "Hey, if they come clean on this and tell the authorities, they can all get sorted out." We realize the DCC isn't the only company that's been dumping waste in this river, and if they come forth and they said, "Hey, we've got a problem here. We know the river's toxic. We caused part of it, but we didn't cause all of it." And so let's let's get all the liars in the room, if you will, and figure this all out. So I appreciated that. Um, but many of the comments, as I was saying, focused on the what could how the company might be harmed by this or benefited by this, and that's a very, I guess, basic view of morals. One part of the text that we're not going to cover, but I'd like to point you to, is in chapter 6 on pages 169, 170. Kohlberg talks about the level of our cognitive development, cognitive moral development, and basically says that if you're focused on whether you're punished or not, that's very I'd use the word primitive cognitive moral development. That's very you see that in children. You know, right and wrong is defined only by whether they get in trouble or not. And Kohlberg says that as we develop our moral minds, we move beyond whether we are harmed or not, and we start thinking about a more robust concept of morals. And so we start thinking about simply, what's good for society? And I liked that Guo Dong pointed us to that, and he said, and I'm going to come back to this a little bit, but when he said, well, it's more than just a moral business. It's I think he actually said it's also related to the human environment, um, and helping people. And so he's kind of, if you will, espousing some of this more developed cognitive morals, and saying, well, we got to think about what's good for society. And so then, as Kohlberg goes on and says, as we further develop, morally speaking, we come into these more abstract concepts of what is right and wrong, and regardless of whether it benefits me or you or whatever, it's just simply right or wrong. So you have to consider that. So then, the last thing I want to point out to you is, if we look at in chapter 5 on figure 5.1. Then we can see what impacts Jared's decision, what impacts on one's moral decisions. And one of the first things is intensity. And so, do we realize that this is actually a problem? And Guo Dong kind of points to that. And he says, hey, this is a problem. It's not just about whether we're going to get hurt or not, but we could be harming humanity, and we could be harming the environment. We're killing fish and all that. And so, if someone sees that there is a problem, well, then that's the very first step of good moral decision making. Now, figure 5.1 says there's other factors that will influence us. We have the individual factor, Jared himself. He's 4 years on the job. He's brand new in plant management. That's going to impact how he decides this. He may not feel as confident in his abilities just yet, since he's new as a plant manager and relatively new in the Darwin Corporation, only being there 4 years. And so therefore he may be more influenced by his superiors than someone who's a more seasoned professional. And then we have organizational factors. What is Darwin Chemical Company's position on this? And that's why I always have you consider the facts. Well, one of the facts of the case is that the company had procedures that stated that waste had to be disposed of safely. And obviously, waste that goes into the river isn't being disposed of safely. So the organizational factor says this. Darwin Corporation says this should not be happening, and at least according to their policies. And so that would guide Jared to say, well, maybe we should come clean on this one. And then just simply opportunity. Well, Jared's over there in China, and he's the plant manager. And I'm not sure how much corporate governance there is in Darwin Corporation, and how much autonomy Jared has, but obviously if there's a lot of autonomy and the corporate governance structure isn't very strong, well, he can get away with this. He can get away with dumping toxic waste and perhaps not even having to tell the authorities about it. And so, and if the authorities aren't checking, then there's even more opportunity, and so therefore he may end up making what I would say is a poor moral decision. Why would I say it's a poor moral decision? Well, because of this. We have to consider what is the underlying moral principles involved in this case. And I believe the underlying moral principles involved in this case, there are several, but one of the main thing is what Guo Dong pointed out. Hey, human life is at stake here. And if it's harming a fish, and one of the other facts is for every liter of water used, a half liter of toxic waste is produced, that's a lot of toxic waste. And that's going down the river and into the watershed, and a river where people use it for life-sustaining activities like fishing, and who knows what else. And so, therefore, really, we say, so do we have a responsibility for human life? And I think, it's easy to conclude we do. And so, therefore, Jared really kind of has to take care of this problem, and just like Tara said, tell the authorities, get it all straightened out. One last point, I appreciate Chloe taking the devil's advocate view on this. It's good to do that. It furthers the discussion. I like that she said, hey, I'm just going to play devil's advocate here. So then we know that she really doesn't maybe believe in what the statements that she's making or the question that she's posing, but it's a good question to have. And so I really appreciate that. So excellent job on the comments from this week's discussion. And we'll move forward for the last week. So I'll see you guys online.